Hello, and welcome to Prism. Prism is a design-oriented podcast hosted by me, Dan Hardin. Like a glass prism that reveals the color hidden inside white light, this podcast will reveal the inside story behind innovation, especially the people that make it happen. My aim is to uncover each guest's unique point of view, their insights, their methods, or their own secret motivator, perhaps, that fuels their creative genius.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Cole Derby, Director of the Industrial Design Team at Whipsaw. We've got Anson in the house.
Hey, my name is Anson Cheung, and I'm an industrial designer. I currently have a small studio based in San Francisco. I used to be a partner at a studio called Bold Design in San Mateo, California, and I was there for about 10 years. And yeah, it's really great to be here doing this with you, Cole.
Well, and what kind of projects did you work on over your, 10 plus, a little over 10 years at Bold?
So I worked on a huge variety of things. I think being in Silicon Valley, you get exposed to just a wide gamut of ideas and products and projects. So everything from consumer tech to robotics to healthcare to even a chicken coop thrown in there. So a bit of everything, really.
Yeah, same at Whipsaw. I mean, the agency life kind of just broadens your skill set, kind of hones you in every aspect because you work on so many different things, so many different industry categories. So some of the topics today, this is, thinking about industrial designers, hiring them, what we look for in portfolios, what should other teams look for in hiring an industrial designer, whether it's in-house or an agency, or even hiring somebody or an agency to help you with your product. So one of the key questions, we'll just run through some high-level topics here. What key traits might a business look for when hiring an industrial designer or even a consulting agency?
Well, I think when you're a business looking to hire industrial design help, I think you need to be very clear about what your needs are, whether you're in kind of more of a strategic definition phase or whether you're looking to execute on a product that's going to market very quickly. I think you need to be very honest about where you are in your product development process and maybe even talk to some advisors or experts who have done it before and see where industrial design can fit into your product development plan. Because I think there's a huge range of areas where a outside consulting firm can help, but they need to know how best to help you. And it's sort of up to you to tell them that at a base level, and then also up to them to maybe suggest some other ways that they could help you get to your end goal.
Yeah, well, and they're bringing you in because they don't inherently have those capabilities in-house. So there's so much collaboration between the in-house engineering teams and marketing and business and all these other facets, but having enough trust in that industrial designer or agency that you hired to help fill the gaps. So I think there's hiring an industrial design agency or even a contractor, but then there's actually hiring one for your team, hiring somebody on staff. And so I think the best industrial designers are somebody who's this perfect blend of being creative and pragmatic at the same time, but being creative and brave and being able to speak and try new things. Somebody who's sits at the table with ideas but doesn't say anything is the worst. So yeah, you've got to have somebody that has enough influence, trust, and power of their ideas, but isn't overzealous and full of ego either, where they're not listening to people.
Yeah, I think they should approach, hopefully, with a degree of empathy where they're able to understand the needs of various stakeholders in the organization. They should be able to understand the needs of the consumer, the end user, and take all that into account when they're providing their design solutions. Otherwise, if they're just coming from a place of ego and kind of sort of saying that their idea is best just because they came up with it, then that's not going to be a great working relationship.
Yeah, you mentioned value, the end user. There's also value for engineering. I mean, at the end of the day, industrial designers make things. We make physical products. It's blurry right now, product designer, where we stand in terms of user experience, but having an industrial designer who you hire that values how things are made, how they get put together, the value of engineering, and being best friends with those engineering teams is huge. Because I think the old days of the engineering teams being just scared to have a designer on board, I'm seeing far less of that, where now we've just got such blended teams. You need an industrial designer who values all those different aspects.
Yeah, that's great, because I think early when I started in my career, there definitely was a lot of that. And I think we've come a long way, and there's been a lot of more design-centric products that have entered the market. And I think more and more engineers are accepting of collaboration with industrial designers and even seek it out. So I think the more we can understand each other and work together, and I know Whipsaw has in-house engineering as well, so obviously that can be a huge benefit. The tighter those two disciplines are integrated, the better for the product outcome.
Yeah. And I think our industrial designers, we always look for some honesty and authenticity. So there's almost every project we work on, it's some type of group project. So whether you're looking at a student portfolio, it's a massive project in the portfolio. You have no idea whether they did all the work or whether they were part of a team. And the same goes for hiring an industrial designer who's 20 years in the profession. So being honest about your contribution, and this goes for anyone who's looking to get hired, but even hiring an industrial designer and picking apart kind of what was your contribution to that project and how did you work with people along the way to get it all done is important, instead of just taking the project and assuming it's yours and putting it in your portfolio without acknowledging the giant team behind you.
Yeah, that's something I always really like to see in portfolios, when people are credited and their specific names mentioned. So like in X designer's portfolio, they're crediting like 4 or 5 other designers or even engineers. I think that's always really nice to see. And when you don't see that, it's always maybe a little bit of a question, like what does it take away from you to put that there?
Yeah.
It really doesn't hurt.
Well, it kind of leads into how we all might evaluate the portfolios of an industrial designer. Are there any tips and things that you've looked at in evaluating? You run through portfolios trying to hire, whether it's somebody on your team or an intern. How do you evaluate those?
So I think as designers, it's maybe, for better or for worse, I think aesthetics is a huge part of it, and being able to make a really good first impression and kind of have that wow factor is definitely important. I think when we're in design school, you're kind of taught that the idea is like really important, and at least where I went to school, sometimes the presentation of it was maybe downplayed a little bit. But I think in the professional world, that first impression counts for a lot. So I think having a good first aesthetic impact on the viewer is a really big part of getting your foot in the door, because if you don't pass that first kind of sniff test, you kind of don't get a second look, no matter how good your idea is.
I'm glad you said sniff test, because imagine going in the grocery store and buying products just purely based on the ingredients list. You're presented with the back of the box first. So we're all visual people. You pick up the juiciest tomato you want, the food that's most appealing, but there has to be substance underneath that shiny object too.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the next thing that I tend to look for is whether the process makes sense. Like, can I follow the logic? Is there kind of, is there a clear through line from start to finish where the designer has articulated how they made certain decisions and how they use the skills in their tool set to evaluate and validate certain design decisions along the way?
Do you look for that kind of revelation to happen early in a project as it's presented, or the narrative throughout, or is it a punchline at the end?
I think I kind of look at it throughout. Like, I look at how they frame the problem. Like, do I believe what they're telling me about what the problem is? Like, do they have sufficient insight to back that up? Have they done like a wide enough concept exploration to actually come up with compelling solutions to the problem that they've stated? Is it even consistent? Because sometimes I feel like, I think some design students, they like kind of go through the motions. They have research, they have concept work, they have prototypes, they have CAD, they have the final result, but it's all disjointed. Sometimes there's no through line, and you can't see how one thing is related to the next. So it kind of feels like a box ticking effort rather than like an intelligent problem solving process.
Well, maybe because they had to they had to pass the class.
Yeah, and I get that sometimes you have to do certain things to pass a class, but
yeah.
I think when that comes through in your portfolio, you're in trouble.
Yeah, there's a lot of portfolios that come through where it looks like they just copied and pasted whatever the process was for that semester.
Right.
And so talking about the, juicy tomato, you don't see that in the beginning. You walk through a process, and it might be a lot like how it is in school and in the professional world, right? You start with research and insights, you develop a brand and a persona, and in the real world, it's all real and it's going to affect somebody. But in school, you have no idea how it all goes together. So it takes a lot of foresight I think for a student to realize who they're presenting to and having to retune the portfolio. And I know they get done with their semester and they're like, I'm done, hands go up, time to party.
Yeah.
But you got to tune and tweak that portfolio to, whether it's going on Instagram or Behance or your own website, and understanding who you're actually talking to is a really tough thing to understand, and how to modify your portfolio based on your audience.
Yeah, I think it's a really tough challenge for students who maybe have never even worked professionally, and that's not their fault, but that's where I think getting another set of eyes on it can be really helpful. So if you're able to reach out to a professional friend who's already working, or even if just randomly reach out to people on LinkedIn or something and try and get some professional feedback, a lot of times people who are working as designers are willing to give some feedback. It's not always that you'll get a response, but there are certain times where people have a spare moment and they're like, yeah, I'll do like a quick 30-minute call and just give you some notes.
Yeah,
I think that can be really valuable.
I think that's good advice. And it takes a lot of bravery to do that, to just, maybe it's somebody you met at a school show or a conference at some point, but to just cold call and reach out and ask for advice is a huge step. But then you do meet so many people in this industry that are, it's a craft, it's a trade at the end of the day, and so much is learned over time, and people love what they do, and so they'll pass on knowledge if it definitely helps out their peers and the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I think most people are willing to help others along the way, and it's all in how you ask. It's kind of going in without an expectation, but just saying like, hey, if you have a little time, here's my portfolio, would love to jump on a call, but no worries if you're too busy. Like, it can be as simple as that. I think I've received a lot of requests where it's just kind of, there's sort of too much baked in expectation, and then it kind of puts you off from responding. But the people that come with just a quick request without asking too much time, I'll tend to respond to those.
Yeah. Yeah. So even in selecting that, perfect industrial designer, if you're hiring somebody and there's the balance between technical skills and creativity, I think it's a good ideal if there's a blend of both. We have to play somewhere between a user experience designer and an engineer. But the creative vision, it's something that's hard to teach. A lot of people just get it. And the ones that get it, it's like you can do very little conversation with that person and they're like, don't worry, I got it. And they come back with what you asked for and then 10 variations on it. But the technical skills can be developed and they can be learned over time, because so much of this job, people graduate and you don't know anything until you start working, and you learn all of these different manufacturing techniques and how to talk to people, how to present, how to switch your brain from designer to sales in the moment with a client. So there's always, in hiring an industrial designer, there's always that little creative hook. Like, what's that memorable moment that makes them different than the rest of the pack? Because now everything is online. So many people's portfolios are online. They're all influenced by design trends and blogs. And so there's every once in a while that one person who's a little different. And that's hard to teach. And so that's something that we definitely look for. It's that little edge that makes them stand out. Because all those technical skills, I'm constantly learning every day, something new. And so that's I think when you're in school, it's something that is kind of out of your perception, because you've got your head down in the work and the school and just like, I just need to graduate and get a job. But then there's being able to take a step back and realize the bigger picture. And so I think for anyone who's trying to hire an industrial designer, the technical skills mean they can do the work, but there's always that perspective that is hard to teach someone, and it takes years, or they're just born with it.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree with what you said. That creative spark is hard to teach. And I think I've hired people who go both ways, like people who are technically very strong, but maybe didn't have as much of a creative spark. And then people who had the creative spark, but maybe technically weren't that strong. And I've definitely found that the people who have the creative spark flourish more as industrial designers. And I think maybe there are ways to like stretch and grow that muscle, but I think there has to be some inherent spark somewhere. It's hard for you as like a manager or an external influence to light that spark. But if the spark is there, you can kind of nourish it and help it develop, and hopefully work together to create something with it. But if it's not there at all, I think as employers, it's maybe better to look elsewhere, or to make sure that you're hiring someone that can maybe do a lot of the technical aspects, but don't expect them to maybe do a heavy lift on the creative front. And that, some organizations have a really good place for someone like that. Like, maybe someone's like a master at CAD surfacing, but they don't always like come up with the best like design concept. But if someone gives them a concept, they can execute it beautifully. So
yeah, and that person who's maybe less creative is quite honestly a late phase engineer. Because as an industrial designer, you play engineer a lot until we know enough to get into trouble. But somebody who's just doing the work and executing it becomes more of an engineering role than somebody who's really coming up with like the big idea and creative vision. And so you mentioned kind of even specialization. So if you were hiring somebody in an industrial design position, do we look for somebody who's more of a generalist, or somebody who has a specialty in a certain area or an interest in a certain area?
I think that really depends on what your organization is. Like for me right now, as a very small studio, I'm looking for generalists because, well, actually, let me take that back. As a really small studio doing work in some very specific fields, I guess I look for more specialists in terms of their design interests, but I need generalists in terms of process. Like they need to be able to do the whole process or have potential to do the whole process. But I'm also looking for people who are like interested in robotics or maybe interested in high-tech stuff rather than more like lifestyle goods or, you know, kind of consumer tech, because I'm not doing as much of that right now. So I think it depends. Like, you know, when I was at a much larger studio, based on the kind of needs of the time, we might be looking for something slightly different. Like if there are specific upcoming projects that we're trying to staff for that are in a specific industry, we might even like favor portfolios that have work related to that. But if it was, I think also experience level comes into that, because I think when you're hiring less experienced people, it's okay to look for more generalists, like, because it's hard to see where this person's going to develop because they're so early in their career. But as you're hiring more and more experienced people, you maybe need to look for some more specific traits.
Yeah, and even the design team we have here at Whipsaw, we have mostly generalists, but we have people with interests that are unique in certain areas. We have some people that are more interested in transportation and vehicles and engines and, you know, future stuff, and we've got people who are more interested in fitness and well-being and mindful meditation, and this crosses different generations, and it crosses where all the different places that our designers come from all over the world. So I think for an agency, it's always good to have people that are well-rounded, but being able to put somebody on a project that has a certain interest. You know, if a pet project comes up and you have somebody that has a bunch of dogs at home, they're probably better suited to grasp the needs of the project and the end user. But if you're hiring somebody to help bolster your team, or you're an in-house, you're a company full of engineers and you're trying to hire an industrial designer and you're in the medical field, could be good to hire somebody that knows at least a little bit about your world. You know, the end user and procedures and all that, that contractor's not surrounded by a team of people who might have diverse influences to help move that project along. So if you're looking to hire a contract industrial designer, I think finding somebody in your industry that has designed products like yours in the past would be super helpful. But there's so many industries that cross over. I always think about automotive designers and footwear, shoe designers. Yeah. They're the same person. They've got the same motivators. They're obsessed about their industry. But then you have some car companies like, I'll probably be corrected on this, but I remember when the C8 Corvette came out, they hired footwear designers to do the interior.
Interesting.
Because it's materials and it's stitching and it's wrapping around the human body. Yeah. But the level of obsession over details in their craft is the same. And so they worked really well together.
Yeah, I think there's so much crossover between different industries. And I think that's one of the great things about working in consulting is that you start to see things in terms of design and user problems rather than specific industries. Like you start to see like, oh, this, I'm designing a chicken coop or whatever, but I'm seeing problems here that I've solved in the context of, a consumer electronics project, and I can bring that kind of thinking into it. So I think the cross-pollination aspect in consulting is why it's such an interesting field to work in.
Yeah, I mean, that helps. That comes through when you hire an agency, because you get a team of people, a team of people with different projects and backgrounds and experiences. So I remember here at Whipsaw, we were working on a project for us, but it was inspired by so many of these different projects that we'd come across. It was inspired by outdoor product. I'll call it a camping product, right? Aluminum poles and carbon fiber bits and bungee cord in between influenced its architecture completely. And then way over here, we're also designing and working on sex toys at the same time. And the silicone overmolds and all these, buffed away seam lines and everything made the perfect handle. And so you're like, baby product, sex toy, camping gear, industrial commercial equipment, and it all comes together and makes the perfect solution for what you're working on. But without all those extra experiences, that would be really tough to get hiring a single industrial designer with a very specific background.
Yeah, that's the benefit of a diverse team.
So what kind of, if a company or an individual is looking to hire an industrial designer or bolster their team, any red flags that come to mind? Even in your experience hiring people, what type of things do you watch out for?
I think going back to what we were talking about earlier, a big ego is kind of a red flag. I think people who come across as a little too bombastic and kind of talk themselves up a lot, that can kind of signal some potential future friction in working in teams. And
that also comes with an inability to take criticism.
Yeah.
They put so much ego, for the lack of a better term, and love into their work that they have a hard time taking any sort of criticism.
Yeah, I think that you should always be very careful about, because when you are in the trenches with that person, you can't always have an open dialogue about what you're doing and kind of move forward together. It can always turn into some sort of minor conflict, and nobody feels good about that. So I think the people that I've had a hand in hiring in the past have always been team-oriented, kind of able to express their ideas and opinions with some conviction, because I think you do need that, but not trample over other people and kind of always think that they have the right idea. So I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, and then even hiring somebody to work, as a permanent employee, you have to think, well, they've got maybe a killer portfolio, but can I work with this person? Am I going to get along with this person? If we're in a brainstorm session and we're working, is this person just going to get frustrated and walk away? Or are they going to actually dig through and work together? Because we have the same end goal, but some of that ego that you talked about, it still exists. I mean, I think there was the old, 30 years ago, you hired the ego designer to design your product, and he'd want to slap his name on the side of it.
Yeah.
It doesn't quite exist anymore.
I think there's an era of the rock star designer that maybe has come and passed.
Yeah.
And these days, I think design is more about collaboration. And I think that's a huge step forward, because I think there were a lot of examples of products designed by those kinds of rock star designers that maybe haven't stood the test of time that well.
Yeah. I think there's another red flag that we certainly look for or look out for. A designer who hops around a lot. It was still a trend, maybe a trend the last 5 years where you see, or 10 years probably, where you see a designer staying at a job for a year. They're like 6 months here, a year here, 2 years at another place, a year at another place. And so I always have a little trepidation hiring somebody who doesn't seem to really adjust and sink into their job. I feel like everybody who's hired at a new place needs at least a year to feel like, all right, I get this. I get my team, I get along with people, I know what they're going to do, I can predict their movements. And then all of a sudden a year goes by and you're out. It's like, I don't know how you could successfully do your job. So I always look out for people like that.
Yeah, I think that can be a little bit of a red flag. It doesn't automatically put people out of the running for me. I think I want to hear what the story is. And if they have some sort of reasonable explanation, like I think I hired someone before who had that kind of a resume, and they said that they wanted to just try as many different environments as possible and then kind of settle into one. And I think that can be a smart strategy to shape your career as well. But I think if it's really short stints, like just a couple months, then you need to probe a little bit like why that is, because it may not be the company, it may be the person. Yeah.
So I guess if you're, if the work is great, personality is great, you got to dig into why they've, jumped around in the resume and just dig into the story of their past.
Yeah.
But initially, I know when we're looking at portfolios, you see a year at multiple companies, and people are either looking to level up really quickly, they have less value in the company that they're working for.
Yeah.
But some people just haven't found the right company. You might get hired at a place that sounds great, and then you get sit down, and it's all sunshine and rainbows in an interview, and then all of a sudden you're on site and you're like, wow, this is not what I signed up for. So that can happen as well.
Yeah. I mean, my shortest stint at a job was 6 weeks, and I just realized this is absolutely not the place for me, and I need to get out. And luckily I had a way out, but yeah. So I try to give people a little leeway on that.
Yeah. So what kinds of trends, when we talk about trends that might shape the way companies hire, the way that they view industrial designers today, or even trends that shape the industrial design industry, the old school industrial designer who was more focused on the beauty of form and materials, I think it's a little bit different today. And so what might companies look out for, or things to keep in mind when they're hiring an industrial designer?
I think some trends that are shaping the way either companies hire us as industrial designers, or how studios hire industrial designers, are things like, well, I think the major thing is that design is kind of table stakes now. I think a lot of consumer facing companies, and even to some extent like commercial, like B2B companies, understand that design needs to be part of the equation. And I think that means that in some ways there are more opportunities for designers to get involved. I think it may not always feel that way, just because there's like such a huge proliferation in the number of designers these days.
Yeah. Design is ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Corporations have built their own in-house teams, and everyone has a handle on it.
Yeah, like companies that I never would have thought would hire industrial designers are hiring them now to be in-house or contractors. I think in terms of maybe hiring, like from an industrial designer's standpoint, getting hired, I think some of the trends shaping that might be like remote work is a big one. I think we all had to learn to deal with that during the pandemic. And I think most industrial design studios made it work pretty well. I think we all learned how to do that. But I think these days, more and more people are kind of expecting some element of flexibility, and that is finding its way into hiring.
Yeah.
Where people are asking for that. People are looking for hybrid work environments.
We were forced to adapt. but we're creative people, so we could do it. But then all of a sudden people start realizing the benefits of being able to work remotely or work from home, and especially those with young kids and families, and where they need that flexibility now that they've never had access to before.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a place for that kind of flexibility in working in industrial design. I do think designers tend to work better when they're together in a studio, and that has to be taken into account as well. I don't think a fully remote design studio is possible. Well, it's definitely possible, but whether you're collaborating as effectively as you could be, maybe is a question.
Well, we all did that for 2 years.
Yeah, but I think we all felt the friction.
You feel the friction, and that's why software like Miro and all these other collaboration things started popping up. But then you find the shortcomings pretty quickly.
Yeah, I don't know if you felt this way. It was so much more tiring. It was draining in a way that being in a studio somehow isn't. And hopefully, if you work in a design team, your place of work is a creative space, and you like going there. That's hopefully the idea.
Yeah.
But when you're collaborating purely digitally, there's a lot of friction that builds up over the course of the day. Like when you're just going from video call to video call, I think there's a lot of maybe unrecognized stress that's building up that you're not aware of, but it takes a toll on your mental health and creative output.
Yeah, and I think for anyone who's currently an industrial designer or looking to hire one, it's important to think that and realize that industrial designers, we need a space to come together and collaborate and hibernate. So, being able to take your work home and incubate by yourself and go to weird places and come up with ideas and come back to the group. And so the hybrid approach, and for companies that are trying to hire an industrial designer, it's a huge benefit. You've got I think it's a just soul sucking to have an industrial designer sit in a vacuum at home without that interpersonal collaboration. But equally having them sit at a desk, for 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, there isn't the ability to break away and just be by yourself in your own thoughts. Because sometimes those good ideas don't come when you're sitting at your desk. You're like on your drive somewhere, you're watching a movie, or you're in the shower, and all of a sudden lightning hits and you're like, oh, that's it. That's a good idea. So, that happens in places that's hard to predict. And so having the flexibility and allowing an industrial designer to have that flexibility is going to be hugely important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. I know there's some pauses in here that we can cut out. Another trend that I see, at least now, with industrial designers is there's this increasingly blurry space in between a user experience designer, an XD designer, and an industrial designer. Along the line of development, we've got research and insights and user experience that helps to feed a lot of the work that industrial designers do, that feeds the work that mechanical engineers do. But now products are everything. It's digital and physical. It's software, it's hardware. So we end up with these meetings where the industrial designers are right next to the traditional, visual graphic designers and software designers, and we're all talking about the same goals and the same experiences with a product. And then we break and go do what our specialty is, but then to come back together and collaborate. I don't know if it's a trend. Trends come and go. And so I think this is more of an evolution of the way that industrial designers aren't just hired to do the pretty thing. Here's the form, everything's figured out, just make it look better. But we're so integral into the physical experience and the overall, brand perception and love of the product, because we're rubbing shoulders with everyone from marketing to business, users, software. So or we're more glued into the experience than I think we realize.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think designers, industrial designers specifically, have to become more aware of everything else that their discipline touches. And you mentioned the business part. I think it's critical that designers understand how what they're doing affects the business, and how the business and how your product is sold, and how it attracts customers, how it retains customers, how all that feeds into what you're doing on a physical level. And I think it's definitely an evolution that industrial designers have become less and less siloed, which I think is a great thing.
Yeah.
And able to not just be part of those conversations, but influence those things as well. Because, like you said, products are so fuzzy around the edges these days. It's physical, digital, metaverse, whatever. It's everything. So being able to not be an expert in all of those other things, but at least have empathy for those other disciplines, and also be able to speak a little bit of their language, is a huge benefit to any working designer these days, I think.
Definitely. Yeah. Do you have any memorable, funny stories about hiring a designer in the past, or?
Yeah, I do. I won't name any names, and the person who I'm talking about will know who they are, and we're great friends, so hopefully they don't mind me telling this story. But one of the designers that I hired, they showed up to the interview wearing glasses that they didn't need, which I later found out because they said, it makes you look...
lensless frames?
I think they had lenses, but they were not prescription.
That's funny.
They were like, oh yeah, when you interview, you wear glasses to make yourself look smarter. And yeah, when they showed up for the first day of work, I was like, where are your glasses? And that was the explanation. So yeah, and during...
They got the job though.
Yeah, they got the job. And I mean, this was one of the strangest interviews I've ever done, but they obviously were talented, and they obviously had good thinking skills. So it wasn't hard to hire this person, but during the interview, during the one-on-one discussion, they asked me if they got the job, which is not something that's happened before or since.
On the spot, asking during the interview.
Yeah. So yeah, it was one of the strangest interview experiences that I ever had. And as I got to know this person, I just found out that it was part of their personality. They're just kind of fun and quirky. But yeah, I ended up working with them for many years, and they were great. So
yeah,
none of that stuff kind of affected the quality of the work and the presentation.
Yeah,
I think it can't hurt to be a little memorable.
Yeah, I feel like my memories are always like day one, first week, and this is honestly because we hire such a diverse group of people that, you know, somebody comes in on the first day and they're heating up something in the microwave, and you're like, what is that? Or coming in with one of our interns, I remember in his first week, he comes in and his the tool in his tool belt is a VR headset, and not ask him as part of our process, which, I mean, it is at certain points in time, but we went off to, we took the brief on a project, went off to go start sketching, and then he's standing over in the corner waving his hands around. I'm like, what is he doing? He's like, well, he's in Gravity Sketch, he's doing his thing. He didn't even ask, he was doing his thing. And it was like, it's amazing how you watch a lot of the younger designers, and especially the brave ones, that just they do what they love, and they're, you know, unapologetic, and a lot of times the outcome's great because they put so much passion into it. And we also had a intern years ago. He was the best foam core builder, mock-up modeler ever, and never knew it. Just, you know, you put him to work on building a full-scale foam core. At the time, it was a slot machine, because we build a lot of those big full-scale foam core slot machines for projects. And he was doing radiusing and compound curvature and scoring of this stuff and putting groove lines and pockets in the like black, sheet foam core. And we were sitting there just jaws on the floor. He's still in school and just learning on the job, but he's blowing up people away.
Wow. Yeah, that's one of the greatest things about working with designers. Everyone's got their unique kind of obsessions and things that they get really excited about, and getting people to do things that make them happy is just really fun.
Well, and it's fun in realizing it as a designer that you never feel old. You're constantly learning. I mean, every single day you're learning something new, and the younger designers who come in are teaching you something new. And so you're always at the forefront, especially here in the Bay Area, with the types of clients and the work and the exposure to first of products and technologies. It's really amazing that you have interns coming in and just blowing us away with the things that they're doing, and they're not veterans bringing in all this experience. They're just passionate and creative people.
Yeah, I think it's such an exciting time to be a designer because of all these tools that we have available. I think when I was in school, there was significantly less available, and like Keyshot was just starting to become a thing when I was in school, and they didn't even like mention it when I was going through.
No, I remember going from like V-Ray as a built-in plugin to bunk speed, and then that kind of died and Keyshot emerged.
And now there's there's VR sketching, there's obviously AI and all that. We're entering a phase where it's really more about finding the right tool for the right part of the process, rather than being very prescriptive about like, first you do sketching, and then you do, maybe like 2D rendering, and then like 3D, and then 3D rendering. And I think that just opens up a lot more room for creativity, because you're not so constrained by the limits of the tools that you have.
Yeah, definitely. So the tools, I got two questions. One of them is, as a designer, where do people go? Where can you go for resources? We talk about resources and expertise and training and tools and even getting a job. And then as somebody who's looking to hire, where do they go? How do you find an industrial designer?
Well, I think in terms of looking for a job, I'll do a shameless self-plug here. I run a website called justidjobs.com, where I just post industrial design jobs, because everyone knows it's a complete nightmare to try and filter out industrial design jobs from all the product design, graphic design, UX, UI, all that stuff. And everyone has like their own like sort of methodology, and they're doing it on their own. So I thought, why don't I just like automate it and like do it using AI, and then post it publicly for everyone to benefit from.
Yeah, we can't search product design anymore.
Yeah, it's just crazy how saturated and diluted that term has become.
But it also leans into how blended all the design experience is, right? So it's frustrating in trying to find a job, but then at the same time you realize, oh man, we're all in it together. And
yeah, I don't really buy into that whole they stole our job title kind of thing, because if you think about it, most of the products you interact with on a daily basis are digital products. That's just a fact of life these days. Like you're interacting with mainly one hardware product, your phone, but everything on there is a digital product. So, if they want to share that title of product designer, okay, that's fine. But it does make it really hard for us industrial designers to look for jobs. Mm-hmm. So that's why I made that website. And conversely, that goes for employers as well. I think a lot of people have told me that it's become their number one destination when looking for jobs. So I think the best way, I would say, to get in front of a hungry, employable audience would be to post on justidjobs.com. In terms of like educational resources, I think LinkedIn is a treasure trove of advice from people who are kind of further along the path. And I know it's kind of become a little bit of a meme, like everyone's got their LinkedIn advice that they're doling out, but you do see people who are pretty established in the industry sharing good wisdom on there. So I think it's a good place to just keep tabs on things and see what kind of the hiring trends are and what maybe your future employer might be saying about how they work or the kind of work that they do.
And especially if you're looking to, one, get hired, but just to learn new tools and ways of thinking. It goes back to being a little brave. I think there's some people that might avoid clicking on the connect or follow to people they don't know, but just do it. There's like you said, a treasure trove of information and videos and tutorials. And I think, I start to dive into these philosophical ideas of is traditional college really necessary? Like with all these helpful links and learnings, workshops and things like that. So
the internet has anything you could possibly want to learn.
I think this is a good conversation. Hopefully give some people into insights about hiring and maybe the thoughts and personalities of an industrial designer and where they fit into the process. I know we're just touching on a lot of different high-level topics here, and each one of these could be its own hour-long podcast. But Anson, it was great having you in studio, and look forward to more of these conversations. And
great to chat with you, Cole. Thanks for having me.
Sounds good. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Prism. Follow us on whipsaw.com or your favorite streaming platform, and we'll be back with more thought-provoking episodes soon.
Prism is hosted by Dan Hardin, principal designer and CEO of Whipsaw. Produced by Saoirse Lewis, mix and sound design by Eric Buell.